I'm Christine, a 41-year-old homemaker. My husband, Mark, and I first crossed paths at work, eventually tying the knot after 5 years. Our joy was complete with the arrival of our son, Jake, now an adorable 5-year-old. While I'd love to spend every moment with him, our financial constraints necessitate my working and leaving Jake at a daycare center. Jake, being understanding, often makes simple requests, like wanting an omelette tomorrow. His innocence makes it easy to comply, although I secretly suspect it's because my culinary skills don't extend far beyond basic dishes. Despite my excuses, I can't deny the challenge of crafting a perfect omelette. The early years with Jake were blissful, with our family outings and weekend drives creating cherished memories. However, things started changing when Jake turned 3. Mark, once elated by Jake's presence, began coming home late, citing frustration with Jake's occasional fussiness as the reason. Mark's late arrivals became more frequent, often extending into the early morning hours. His excuses seemed flimsy, and the scent of sweet perfume on his suit raised suspicions. Though bothered, I chose to ignore it, prioritizing Mark's role as a decent father when Jake was at his best. Fast forward 2 years, and Jake has grown into a lively 5-year-old. His vitality contrasts sharply with Mark's deteriorating attitude. Mark's impatience surfaces even for trivial matters, like a spilled cup of tea. Attempts to address Jake's behavior result in Mark snapping and refusing to engage with him. Conversations with Mark have become strained. His dismissive attitude toward family time and insistence on eating out instead of my cooking add to the tension. Suggestions for outings on his days off are met with resistance, as Mark prioritizes rest over quality time together. It's disheartening to witness Mark's persistent irritability, seemingly stuck in a perpetual fussy face. Despite my attempts to bridge the communication gap, our exchanges have devolved into arguments, leaving me to wonder if Mark will ever outgrow this phase at 40 years old. I once confronted him about his perpetual anger, asking why he was always so furious. As expected, he responded with his usual ire, claiming, "It's because you're useless, obviously. You're passing that on to Jake. I wish he turned out more like me." It was a hurtful statement, insinuating that all of Jake's positive traits were inherited from him, while any negative qualities came from me. I found it hard to believe his audacity. My frustration with Mark escalated, with his words and actions causing me considerable emotional pain. Thoughts of divorce crossed my mind, as he seemed one step away from ending our marriage due to his behavior and lack of respect for our family. Despite it all, I stayed, holding on to the love I still had for my husband. Even though Jake was scared of Mark, he clung to a semblance of affection for his father. Living with a husband who was perpetually in a bad mood wore me down, but I lacked the courage to break up our family. Then, one day, Mark brought up the topic of a trip with some colleagues from work. These colleagues were the ones he was close to, the ones reveling in their single lives. He casually informed me of his decision to join them on the trip. I questioned the rationale behind his sudden desire for a getaway. Mark expressed his frustration, claiming he had been patient for too long, sacrificing all his time for the family. According to him, I spent all the money he earned on useless luxuries. I retorted that I was not indulging in luxuries, and, in fact, contributed more to our family than he did. The harder I worked, the more money I made, but Mark seemed to put less and less into our family. His trip, financed by our shared resources, infuriated me. He declared, "I'm going away for a week from tomorrow, whether you like it or not. Don't complain." I was taken aback by the abruptness of his decision and felt my anger simmering. Before I could respond, Jake, who was supposed to be asleep, woke up. Panicked, I rushed to attend to him, apologizing for the disturbance. As I tried to put Jake back to sleep, I sensed something was wrong. His body felt hot, and he complained of a headache. In an instant, his eyes rolled up, and he collapsed. Frantically, I called for an ambulance. Mark, who I assumed would accompany us, refused to come along. Despite my frustration, I had no choice but to board the ambulance alone. Thankfully, the test results indicated a non-serious illness, but Jake was admitted for further tests. I called Mark to provide updates, balancing the urgency of the situation with the need to keep him informed. "What do you want?" I could sense his extreme annoyance, but with no time to worry about it. I quickly explained the situation and urgently asked him to bring a change of clothes for Jake's hospital stay. "Are you joking?" was his incredulous response. "I can't make it. I don't want to be late for tomorrow's trip, so I'm staying at my colleague's tonight." "Are you serious? Your son is in the hospital, and you're still going on a trip?" I exclaimed, hoping for some understanding. "Of course I am. She doesn't need me there for a simple checkup. Jake is suffering from a high fever, so there's nothing I can do," he callously replied. "Yes, there is. I asked you to." Before I could finish, he abruptly hung up. I tried calling again, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustration and anger surged through me. I didn't have his colleague's phone number to reach out for assistance. In the end, I called my parents and sought their help, feeling betrayed by Mark's callous abandonment of his son in the hospital. 2 strikes against him, and I could sense the 3rd strike looming. 3 days later, Jake's tests were over, and he was back to his usual energetic self. The results showed no problems, and he would be discharged from the hospital the next day. Planning to buy some pudding for him, I picked up my phone to check messages, and that's when it happened. It vibrated with an incoming call from a former colleague, Cindy. "Christine, where are you?" Cindy's voice sounded panicked. "I'm at the hospital." "Never mind that. It's an emergency," I replied, thinking it was related to Jake. "Apparently, your husband died in an accident." I couldn't comprehend her words. "What? This is a joke, right?" But her voice on the other end persisted. In a panic, I ran out. The shocking fact that my husband had passed away was hard to grasp. My colleague continued with more unsettling details. Mark was on a trip alone with a woman, and she had driven into oncoming traffic, colliding with a tree. There had to be a misunderstanding. Mark was supposed to be with his male colleagues. The thought that he could have been killed in a car accident with a woman seemed impossible. In a frenzy, I called my parents and urgently asked them to look after Jake, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. In a state of panic, I rushed to the hospital where my husband was admitted. Amid my frantic thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder why they had called the company before reaching out to me. Nevertheless, it seemed like the situation was not a fabrication, so I hastened to verify the details. According to my former colleague, the men who were supposed to be with my husband were safe. Unsurprisingly, they were not together. Mark hadn't even bothered briefing them about his fabricated alibi. He was with another woman. 3 strikes. 3 strikes. And it seemed Mark's actions had caught up with him. Doubts lingered about whether he had actually died, and I needed to confirm the truth. As I entered the hospital room, a rattle echoed. To my surprise, there was only one person in the room, undoubtedly Mark. Bandages wrapped around his hands and feet looked painful, but the rise and fall of his chest indicated he was breathing. Cindy's information about his demise was incorrect. Mark was alive. "You're alive," I murmured, moving closer. Examining his slightly open eyes, he seemed a bit shaken. Maybe he hadn't anticipated the company contacting me so promptly. In his usual grumpy tone, Mark spat out, "Took you long enough. Your husband's been in an accident, and it takes you ages to get here. You useless piece off." "Well, good to see he's still his usual self," I interjected, noting his battered appearance. It appeared he had only broken his left hand and right leg, despite the wrecked rental car. "I'm glad you're okay," I told him, to which he replied, "You better take good care of me, huh?" He seemed remarkably fine. As I handed him a sheet of paper, I explained, "When I say I'm glad you're okay, I'm talking about your right hand. If you had broken your right hand, you wouldn't be able to hold a pen to sign this." Perplexed, Mark unfolded the paper, and I revealed divorce papers. "Yes, I was preparing it, which is why I got here late. I know you're injured, so I'll just leave it here. Make sure you sign it." "Are you joking? Why would I sign this?" Mark protested. "Wow, you told your girlfriend you were getting a divorce, didn't you? The reason you came home late every night was because you were with her. Was this trip a prenuptial trip too? Good for you. Now you can marry your sweet Michelle." How do you even know her name? Mark questioned. Because I spoke to her, obviously. In fact, before coming to your hospital room, I stopped by the woman's room. She was also in the same hospital. I asked for the woman who was in a car accident and immediately found her. Despite her injuries, she seemed better off than you. Her parents were in the hospital room too. I asked her to tell me everything. I explained, recounting my encounter with the woman. With her parents questioning her, she glared at me and said, "Let him go. I don't know what she sees in you. You're cold to your wife and kids. You don't pay your bills. You go out every night. And you don't care when your kid is in the hospital. The cheating. It's game over." Mark's face instantly turned pale at her damning words. I anticipated his defensive reaction, but it didn't alter my decision. No, she's just for fun, you know. You're the only one I love. Just stop here, Mark pleaded as I filled out the divorce form. Unperturbed, I suggested, even if you tear it up, I've got plenty of space. In fact, why don't I just call a lawyer for alimony and child support? It might be better. A sudden change came over Mark as he shriveled up and stuttered, "I don't want a divorce." "Why not?" I took a deep breath, preparing to say what needed to be said. "Because," I began, "you can spend your money as you like, play around with young women, have children to take care of you, and enjoy life while I do all the dirty housework. A wife at home for security and a girlfriend for fun. What a great life. But if you divorce me, that all disappears." Mark's mouth hung open, and he seemed to lose his voice. I continued, "Wasn't it your perfect life plan? Now it's ruined. You can make a new life plan with Michelle, or whoever you like, but my son and I will not be part of it. Just pretend you died and have a new life." After saying everything I wanted to, I turned to leave the hospital room. Mark pleaded, wait, in a pathetic voice, but I kept walking. In the coming days, I initiated divorce proceedings and hired a lawyer. The discussions included Michelle, who was discharged from the hospital. When Mark claimed he had no intention of divorcing me, Michelle became furious, resulting in a heated argument. Mark resisted signing the papers, claiming I had ruined his life. Despite their conflicts, the divorce became official, and I received almost all the alimony payment I sought. After the discussions, my lawyer and I left the room, leaving Mark and Michelle still arguing. I wondered about the fate of their relationship, but my apathy prevailed. I told them, "I hope you have a lovely life together," before leaving the room, possibly being petty. Despite everything, Jake and I had returned to a peaceful life, free from Mark's mood swings. Regret lingered about not divorcing earlier, realizing Mark's attitude had caused my son pain. Living with just the two of us, I understood that we were perfectly fine without Mark. In fact, every day became a joy. Despite this, I acknowledged Mark as Jake's father, allowing him access if he wanted to see him. Surprisingly, Jake showed no interest. After the divorce, I sent Mark an email confirming alimony and child support payments. His reply was laughable. He recounted his misfortune, stressed from gossip at work, mistakes leading to job loss, and his parents cutting him off. I replied, suggesting he seek help from Michelle. Mark claimed they broke up, and he continued to send desperate messages. I eventually blocked him. As I placed my phone on the table, sipping tea, Jake approached, asking, "What should we do on our day off tomorrow, Mommy?" After a moment's thought, I suggested, "How about we grab some lunch and go to the aquarium?" Jake's face lit up with joy, expressing excitement about the dolphin show. Witnessing his enthusiasm, I couldn't help but smile, feeling content with our peaceful and happy life.